Hello and welcome to today's Transformation Journeys webinar on the topic of driving transformation during COVID-19. My name is Glen Barber and I'm lead partner at Awaken Group. For those that may not know Awaken Group, we've been around for 10 years in the Asia Pacific region, and we work with organizations that are looking to uplift their capability or drive consultancy changes and ultimately drive transformation in their business. So just before I introduce the two expert panelists that we have today for you, just a couple of housekeeping points. Now we've got people dialing in from at least 3 continents, maybe 4. We'll see if they get through, maybe 4. And we're really keen to hear from you today. So really keen. So down the bottom of your screen, there should be 3 icons. One is a Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the session for the panelists, if you have any questions whatsoever, please enter it in the Q&A. And we will get to that either during the session or at the end of the session if there's time. If not, we'll certainly get back to you on those. There's also a poll. So there'll be a couple of polls through today's session. So with the poll, if you just click on that when it pops up and enter in your feedback there. And the other one is chat. So if there's anything that you would like to just raise along the conversation, or say hello, then please just go to chat and send through your message there. So that's from a housekeeping point of view. Now, I'd like to introduce our two experts. Firstly, we have Audrey Lee. Audrey Lee is our transformation lead in APAC for Awaken Group. She's also our practice lead for leadership development and coaching. Welcome, Audrey.
Hello.
Okay, and we also have Richard Kelly. Richard Kelly is one of our senior associates at Awaken Group. I've known Richard, worked with Richard for about 7 years now. When it comes to strategic thinking and getting the best out of teams, you wouldn't find too many better. So welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me here today.
Great. Okay, so we are all in difficult times, and we're all striving to make the most of that. So many of our businesses have actually been thrown into a form of transformation, thrown into a digital transformation. So right at this point, just before we get started, I'd love you to go to the chat section and just type in, what does transformation look like for you? What does transformation mean to you in your business? So just take a moment there, if you go to the chat, and just type in, what does transformation mean for you when you think about it? Right. Yep. So if everyone can just put in your thoughts on transformation from an Awaken Group point of view, just while we're getting those thoughts there, from an Awaken Group perspective, transformation is holistic. We think about change management. We think about change in regards to different buckets of change. So transformation is holistic. Transformation includes the strategy, includes leadership, includes the design. And one of the things that we've certainly learned from working with many clients over the past 10 years is those leaders that decide to go on transformation journeys do not wish to go back. They just keep going forward. So it's very much around that alignment and moving forward. So that's great. And thank you. Please keep sharing those chats because it's very much about hearing from the experts, but also learning from the different people across the different continents who have dialed in today. So Audrey, Richard, some builds there in regards to what transformation means to you?
Sure. Thanks, Glenn. I think transformation to me means really having a deep change that really takes you to a different place. And when you have the opportunity to do that, like we do now, it can actually take us to a very different direction than we've been going before. So, and I also think there's the opportunity for that change to actually allow us to fully realize our purpose and our mission. And I know as coaches and consultants here, we've been on this journey with our client for a long time, for many years, except for now, I think the stakes are a lot higher You know, we're seeing that if we don't transform, maybe we won't make it. And those stakes are pretty high in a way that they haven't been before.
Great, thanks, Audrey.
Yeah, Glenn, for me, transformation, and I contrast it with change. And businesses change and businesses change all the time. Very few organisations actually transform. Because to pick up on some of the comments in the chat, to transform means to never go back to the way you originally were. And there's usually a burning bridge or a burning passion that makes that happen from a leadership perspective. And we're finding now with the current pandemic that we face, the world, whether it be from an environmental perspective, of course, we're here to talk about the economic perspective. We've had to hit a big reset button, and there's been no opportunity, I think, in human existence that gives us an opportunity economically to change and transform our businesses to something that didn't previously exist. So I think it's a huge opportunity that the world, and we'll get a little bit into that in a moment, has been presented with.
Yeah, great. So the majority of people we are talking to have been thrown into their transformation, whether it's a digital transformation or looking at how do they bounce back. So for the purpose of today's session is how do you actually take the tools and the insights that are being shared and can take those back into your business. Now, Richard, knowing you pretty well, I'm sure you've been, and with your library there in the background, I'm sure you've been spending a lot of time thinking in regards to that strategic connection and how we actually do transform in these difficult times. Can you share some of your initial thoughts and insights there, please?
Yeah, I'd love to share some of the things I've been working on, Glenn, and with any luck, we'll have a slide coming up in a second. So I'd like to share with you a little 2x2 matrix that I've been developing. And I've called it the Survive, Revive, Thrive matrix. And what I want people to think about as I introduce this matrix is that on the vertical axis, I'm talking about, I've labelled it uncertainty. And what I mean by this specifically is your psychological response to uncertainty. Do you, in times of high uncertainty that we are seeing at the moment, most human beings see that as a threat, and there's a flight or fight response. On the one end of the continuum, others see it as an opportunity. So great uncertainty leads to great opportunity. On the other end of the spectrum, there's a fear about uncertainty that can lead to feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. So it's kind of thinking about uncertainty from that psychological response as business owners or leaders within organisations, down onto my horizontal axis, which is the time horizon. And this is around where you focus your time. Do you focus around fixing problems and remediating issues that have come from the past? Do you look at maintaining and keeping the status quo around past practice? Are you dealing with operational issues that keep you in the present as opposed to being proactively looking into the future for where you can drive your business organisation? So if I just go through a couple of builds, we're talking about are you reactive or are you proactive? So I've labelled the first bottom left quadrant the trapped zone, and you've got the levels of uncertainty, you're feeling a helplessness, you're trapped in the past and you need to be rescued. We go then up to the top left zone and we're in the warrior zone. So whilst you see there's opportunity, there's threats and you're responding to opportunities and you're trying to find a way forward and keep cash coming into the business, do all the things that we're seeing organisations dealing with at the moment. On the bottom right side, I've referred to that as the wounded zone. You want to survive to live another day. That's why you're in the future, but you feel this, you don't know what to do. You feel this sense of helplessness and fear, and you just need aid or first aid. And on the top right-hand quadrant, I've labelled that the captain's quadrant, and that's where the organising and marshalling and sense-making is taking place. So what we'd like to do is actually run a quick poll. So if you see down the bottom of your screens, which quadrant would you find yourself in if you're being totally honest about where you are or where your organisation is at the moment. So if we could run that poll, that'd be awesome, guys, if you could respond.
Richard, I'm not sure if we're having a problem there with the poll.
Okay, I might have to look for our production assistants. I think the question is, have we had responses to the poll? Because I can't see them from this end. So if we've had enough responses, then please feel free to end the poll.
There we go.
Okay, wow.
Wow.
So thanks very much for your responses to the poll. So we can see that, that we have the majority of responses in the wounded or warrior zone, and we have some people in the trapped zone. I want to talk a little bit more about that, and it's good to see we've got some people in the captain zone. I want to talk a little bit more about that as well. So, but with the majority of people there in either the warrior zone or the wounded zone. So if I go to the, I'm going to put two more lines on this diagram and label one zone to try and continue to make some sense of this. So I've got the line of survival. So if you're feeling trapped and you need to be rescued, you need to get across this line of survival. And that's around either orientating yourself out of this period of uncertainty to try and find some certainty, some opportunity, and or looking at where you can be in the future. The next line I'm going to put up is the line of revival. So this is where you're either working with the warrior zone, wounded zone, or portions of the captain zone, and you've taken your business back to where it was pre the COVID pandemic, in the case of this example. What we're trying to do is get to the other side of the line of revival, which I've labelled the thrive zone. So this is where the opportunity for true transformation takes place. It's the opportunity for leaders to demonstrate how they can strategically, if you like, transform their businesses into the future.
Yeah, so Richard, I was just in seeing your matrix there. I think that there's probably a lot of companies out there thinking, you know, how do I go from this, in this crisis, from the threat to the opportunity? Because that's a pretty big leap. And I feel like a lot of us are still in that place where, you know, if we were, sometimes, you know, we feel trapped, or we could be in that wounded zone very, very easily. So how do we do that? Get that new place, get to the new place?
Great question, Audrey. This is really around your orientation to whether you've got a growth mindset or a fixed mindset in the terms of Carol Dweck and her work. And it really shows where is your line of resilience. Now, I'm certainly not taking away some of the challenges that businesses face that have significantly put their cash flow under pressure. That means they're unable to pay staff, pay for supplies and materials. And so this is not being fatalistic about the situation. This is, if I leverage some work from Jim Collins back in his seminal work, Good to Great, and what he calls the Stockdale paradox, which he got from speaking with Admiral Alan Stockdale, was confront the brutal truths about where your situation is, but always have belief that you will prevail. And that's the sort of growth mindset I think we're talking about at this point in time in this crisis, is confront the brutal truths of the situation that you face, but have the confidence and the competence that you will prevail. And that will move you up into that positive zone. And then you've got a chance, you've got an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that kind of certainty or that kind of direction and mindset's really, really important right now. It's just being able to organize and actually focus your planning. I think that's what we really need right now in this time of uncertainty. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. So it's all about how we move, if you like this line of survival through the line of revival. So that's a big corridor, and I refer to that as the corridor of courage. How do we work through that corridor of courage and cross that line of revival into the real thrive zone and take the opportunities that the rest of the 21st century will present to us?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, so to build that momentum towards the Thrive Zone, there's a framework that we've been using for over 10 years now, And we keep building and keeping adding on as we work with clients. Now, Audrey, I know that you've been working with it for a while now and incredibly keen. Can you share some insights around it, please?
Sure. I find that this framework is actually pretty exciting because it's holistic and it really reflects, I know our values, Glenn, about being human-centered. So we call this the SPEC'L framework, and it reflects the 5 different areas that we take our clients through. We use it ourselves, especially in the last few months, of transformation. So as we're taking through, taking a look at each one of these areas, we really feel like we're going through a journey, and each area really links back to the other one in order to make that big picture. So, and as Richard was sharing with us through his Thrive Zone matrix, this is really the how of how we get to the Thrive Zone. And it really helps us make some sense out of this crisis when there's so much uncertainty going on. So as we mentioned, and a lot of you put in the chat box, transformation is really about this deep change where we really can't go back to where we were before, right? So the foundation of SPEC'L is this area of purpose. And that's really foundational for us. It really serves as the why statement. And I think that the why statement is so important, especially now, because it brings the motivation and the energy. It gets us out of bed in the morning, right? It gets us going when things are really, really hard, to look at our company's vision and values and strategy. And so I think if we sit down and we really ask ourselves what our purpose is, either to reaffirm that purpose, take a good look at those values that are hanging on the wall and make them real to us throughout the whole organization, right? That's something that is so important for us to be looking at as we're trying to build a values-based culture and trying to get to those mindsets, you know, as Richard mentioned, the growth mindset, really being open to those opportunities and being focused. That's going to be the compass for our journey. So I think that clear direction is really important to bring that certainty. And I also think that the purpose is finding the purpose, realigning that purpose is so important, because you're getting buy-in from the rest of the employees about this purpose, right? You go out to your employees, you talk to them about that, and you align this purpose. And when you get that, you also get the ownership. That really helps break down those factions, those competing priorities, and the silos that are really, you know, that exist in all organizations. But I think if we're working toward a common purpose, we can break those walls down and really bring us back to that focus and have that use the purpose as the compass. So sometimes I know in our work, people say, well, why do we have to start there, right? It may be this meaningless exercise where we have our values, but it's just so important to tie ourselves back into those values and make sure that those are really strong so that we can move forward.
Yeah.
So key part,
I think it's...
Sorry, I was just going to say, Richard,
I think
key part is actually connected to strategy. So, so take it away.
Thanks, Glenn. So I think it's fundamental to start with purpose. It gives you the why and allows you to really understand what is the problem you're trying to solve for your customer. And when you can answer that clearly and you've got alignment with the team, then you can create strategic initiatives to actually put that into action and execute. So it's kind of the foundation stone that needs to be in place first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Now, when we have that clarity of purpose, we actually then move through to the next stage, which is around leadership. Richard, can you share some of your thinking in this space in regards to that connection between strategy that used to be the 3-year, the big strategies, to now the strategy that's happening, and how leaders are actually driving that?
Yeah, a couple of issues evolve there, Glenn. The first is that in times of crises, no leader has perfect view of what's happening on the ground. So if they're going to survive, they have to rely on the view of their teams on the ground as to what is happening. And if they haven't set up a culture that allows that to happen before the crisis hit, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble trying to navigate through this crisis. It may be why some of our viewers and listeners here are feeling in that trapped zone. the moment. What we do find, and just because the current environment has been likened to a wartime environment, we've got this whole concept of what a wartime leader and what a peacetime leader is, and what a wartime CEO and what a peacetime CEO is. And it really gets down to how you prioritize the short term and the long term. And of course, in wartime, there potentially is no long term. So in the words of John Maynard Keynes, the long term is the sum of the short term. So if we're not winning the short term battle, there will be no long term for us. That tends to be the command and control style that is working at that time. However, what we know is that in that kind of transformation thrive zone, it's the collaborative leader that encourages people to challenge the status quo and builds real teamwork that's going to be able to have the agility and nimbleness and anticipation to take advantage of the market conditions. So it's a real balancing act, moving through that corridor of courage, as I've referred to it as.
Yeah, I think, Richard, I think you jumped right into the leadership area, which is the next area of our SPEC'L model. And I think that's great. It just ties into purpose so well. And after building your vision and values and the strategy, I meant just getting into the leadership and understanding what kind of leadership we need, right? And as you mentioned a model that I'm hearing quite a bit. It's the wartime leader, the wartime CEO, and the peacetime CEO. And we see that there are just there's a lot of that command and control that's needed in order to set that direction and clarity, right? And then
create certainty.
Yeah, great certainty. And we need that, I think. That's, we don't want to, we want to hear that from the top. We want to hear that clear vision that people have been planning, from a place where they're looking at it from a big picture from the balcony, right? They're seeing the big picture, and they can really speak to what direction we want to go to and set that purpose. So I think that's really important. And I love that you brought up also the peacetime CEO, because we need both and, right? We need that collaboration, and we need our leaders to really see that this is an opportunity for us to move into co-creation more than ever, more than in our normal times. We're in this place where we have to listen to our customers, we have to listen to our employees and other stakeholders in order to really collaborate and make sure that we're going the direction that we need to go. And, frankly, coming up with the solutions that we need, because we can't necessarily come up with that just by ourselves. So we really have to have that perspective. And I also just wanted to say something else about this leadership area before we move on, Glenn. It's just that I think leaders, especially senior managers, really need to lean into that opportunity that it's a live laboratory for us, this context we have to really exercise all of those leadership principles and lessons that we've been learning along the way, all those great leadership articles and books that we have on our shelves. Now is the time, right, to get coaching, to coach other people, to really dust off those ideas and put them into use, because that now more than ever, I think, is really the time to do it.
Yeah, great points. With all the programs that we've run over the years, when I look back at the last 10 years, having the right sponsor and having that leadership at the top who is the sponsor and fully accountable is an absolute starting point. So yeah, it's a good point about leadership, which takes us into if you've got the purpose and you've got your leadership on board, then how do you ensure that you're actually communicating the right story? Now, if you think about change programs, the amount of change programs that we've all been part of that haven't actually worked. And I think the stats are around that 70% of change management programs fail. So one of the key elements around a holistic transformation program is having a story. And the story is so much more than top-down communication. Audrey, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the story is really, it's the conduit really for creating the culture that you really want, and that culture that's going to bring you into that transformation, right? Strategy can only do so much. It's really about the people. And so I think companies often forget this because we spend time, on creating that great those values and that great mission statement, and then we've got a strategic plan all figured out, and then somehow we forget to share it with everybody else. And we just assume, you know, we've been spending so much time in that story and in those great plans and in those great values and mission that we assume our employees and customers know that too. And we actually need to go through an exercise where we communicate that and we get the people around us excited about creating that culture together, because once those values and that purpose is off the wall and is in practice, that's when we create a culture, and that's when we're living our story. So I think it's a really powerful question. You know, I ask it of my coaching clients, but also of the organizations we work with is, you know, if you want to be in that thrive zone, or if you want to be on that transformation journey and get to your goals, what story do you want to tell? And I think that's a really important thing to ask.
Yeah, and if you hear the Jack Welch sort of version in regards to it's only when you're actually sick of hearing your own voice and the amount of times you've said something that it's actually the story is actually starting to get through. What's the practical tips though that people can take from this webinar around the story?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I think that when you communicate, people, especially in a crisis, I mean at all times, but especially in a crisis, you need to really build that trust to create that level of two-way communication you need. So I think transparency and honesty is really important. You know, if you don't know, you don't know, right? And you need to share what you do know, what you don't know, and what your plans are for moving forward to gain that knowledge and set that direction. You know, don't be afraid to share those processes with others and to just be human in that scenario. I also think it helps. This may seem obvious but I think that when your message has clarity, that brings certainty. So you have to spend some time actually crafting and defining your message in order to make sure that your communication is clear and consistent. You know, whether you have good news or bad news, people shouldn't be wondering what's going on because that really brings fear. And I think Richard had mentioned that before, just about how the fear and our fight, flight, freeze tendencies go when we're facing fear. We need to move on and get out of that state of fear. So I also think that with the two-way communication, it's important to listen and make sure that you're really listening, not just with your own plans, but it's like gathering new intel and including that intelligence, including the new skills and knowledge into your plans. And it's an iterative process, right? I know sometimes the word agile is overused, but it's that agile iterative process that's going to get us to the solution, and a constant feedback loop. And also to take in consideration that listening needs to be done with, I think, empathy and compassion, because people really need support now. Again, whether it's good or bad news, it's not keeping bad news from us. It's facing what's really out there, but doing that with a lot of empathy.
Yeah, that's great. The certainly learning from that side and from the story side is actually ensuring that you do have that journey manager that's tied into your leadership as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if anybody that's on this webinar that's actually undergoing a form of transformation, is a strong recommendation that you actually have a very strong comms person as part of that. So and who can provide that clarity and so on. So that's great. So if you look at the SPEC'L framework and you look at, you know, from a purpose point of view, you look at it from a leadership perspective, and you look at it from a story point of view, you've got your alignment. So sitting across there, those three areas, and you know, sometimes they're three different sandpits, but when you bring them together holistically, you can get that alignment across the business. The next one's capabilities. So whenever we work with organizations it's around focusing on the capabilities. How do you develop that future capability? And Richard, I'd love your insight here into the changes that are happening and the changes that are happening all around us, and people being forced into new ways of working and so on. How does that actually impact on the capabilities so we can actually get to the thrive zone that you mentioned before?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. It's a great question. It's a great conundrum, because if we talk about moving to transformation, by some of the definitions we've already put out there, is we're going to be doing different things, and we're going to be delivering different value to our customers than we previously did. And that most likely is going to need different capabilities that we currently have in the skill set of the organisation. A lot of that is somewhat unknown. It's not just about having more technicians, more engineers, more accountants, more lawyers. It's about, for me, the capabilities around the thinking skills and the implicit, I'll call it, personal leadership skills that your people have around things like being constructively able to challenge the status quo, work collaboratively, understand the power of teams, and at a very fundamental level, move to a world where you're practicing how to think, that you're good at thinking through and finding solutions to problems, because too much of capability building today is telling people what to think. And that's built on past practice. So we build programs around building capability around this is what was successful previously. So if you follow these rules, watch this YouTube video, however you want to get that capability built, you'll be successful. What we know that if we're in a transformative state, it's going to be different. The complex environment we find ourselves isn't tailored to that. It's tailored to the ability of how to think skills.
Yeah, I think that's true, Richard. I mean, we can't, what got us here won't get us there, right? I mean, that half mindset, that focus, from your Thrive Zone matrix, I mean, the focus on the past is really what's going to keep us from moving into that future Thrive Zone. So as we're thinking about reskilling and upskilling and really utilizing the talent we have in-house and the resources that we have available to us, I think we have to think about that, how much we're married to the way we did things in the past, and really start looking at even how we learn. I think that's what we're seeing a lot with this. We're all in this forced digital transformation, right? We've all gone to some blended and virtual learning, and we have to think about what we're doing with that and how we learn with that, and building capabilities. And also all the skills that we really, really need to hone down that used to be maybe nice to haves and now are so imperative. And I'm thinking particularly in the area of cultural fluency and adaptive leadership. We really need to have those skills be part of the fabric of the organizations, and not just, here and there. It's a nice to have. It's what we might call a soft skill, but these are really things that I think are going to launch us into that Thrive Zone. So, yeah, that future focus.
Okay, that's great. Rich, I'm just going to we'll move to the next part, which is around the environment of the SPEC'L framework. And I'll get you to make some comment on that in a second. And then Audrey, there's a couple of questions starting to come through, so I'll get you, if you can just have a bit of thinking time in regards to how do you know if you are changing for the better, and what if the transformation is actually for the worse. So I'll come back to you in a moment on that one, Audrey. And if anybody else has any questions, please put it in the Q&A. Love to get your questions, love to hear from you. So if we just go to the back to the SPEC'L framework, we've spoken about purpose, we've spoken about leadership, we've spoken about story, and the absolute importance of that from an alignment point of view. And then it's actually working on those capabilities. What are those future capabilities that are required? What are the competencies that you need to build within your organization? And we've got many clients that are talking to us about that at the moment. So the final part of the jigsaw puzzle is the environment. Now, the environment deals with a whole range of things. It deals with the processes, it deals with your systems. And the systems could be your IT systems, and obviously all the digital systems that are happening at the moment, the changes happening there. But it also deals with the people management systems, which a lot of organizations, when they are driving transformation, or even so when they're driving change, they often jump to one of those, which is around structure or restructure. So, but environment is so much more. It's also around the space that we work within and how we operate. So there's so much more to it. Richard, there's a lot of organizations, a lot of people on this webinar are really starting to look at, from a transformation point of view, how do they bounce back? So in the environment space, once again, connected to Thrive, how do they actually bounce back in the environment space?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. So the challenge is how do I, and the euphemism is, how do I right-size the business to deal with the current cash flow challenges and the profitability required by shareholders, whilst maintaining a capability to be able to deliver on the long-term future value prospects in this transformation, in this thrive zone. So this is a real balancing act for managers and leaders in organisations at the moment, and it probably gets down to keeping that yin and yang between the wartime CEO who's getting things done to make sure the doors stay open today, and the peacetime CEO who's looking to, now, how do we build capability and deliver value into the future, and how are we transforming, how are we challenging our current paradigm. Now, in terms of getting back to the Stockdale paradox and confronting the brutal facts, you may have to let people go in this environment. But how do you do that with respect to keeping dignity, trust, transparency, not just cutting heads for making numbers? We've got to, the accountants say we've got to let 100 people go because that equals $1 million worth of salaries, and that will save us. So let's just go around finding 100 people that want to leave the organisation. As those of us who have been through that know, usually when you put out involuntary redundancies in organisations, the best 100 people go. And that's not what you need to move into the future. You need to keep those 100 people. So it's a difficult area to navigate, Glenn, but it's of special, it needs special importance now. Special consideration what you're doing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Richard. Audrey, do you want to just take that question that I asked before, and then we'll move to the next steps?
Sure. I think the question was, how do you know if you're changing for the better? And what if the transformation is for the worse? And I think there's really two things to look at with this question. You have to look at whether, and I assume that if the transformation is for the worse, perhaps you're not transforming according to what your values are. You feel like that what you've turned into isn't really who you are. And that's really where that alignment is so important, and that all of that homework really points you toward the direction you want. If you're talking about the actual context, like we're in a place, we're actually in a context that you don't like or is worse, that piece of it is maybe outside of your control. What's happening outside of us are the conditions that we're transforming into. So I think that we have to look at that context and start seeing, well, what can we do? What can we control? And that's our story, that's our purpose, and aligning that and making sure that we're turning into something that is true to ourselves. And I also think, as with anything, how do we know if we're changing for the better? I think feedback is so critical. And that's feedback internally and externally to make sure that, okay, this is what I want to look like, and this is what I actually look like. And that's hard to do. That's hard to do in peacetime, right? I mean, feedback always may sound like an attack. It may sound like negative input, and it can be that way. But if we have that growth mindset, as again, Richard was speaking to, and we're really looking toward the future, we're really only seeing this as an opportunity to jump into a new place.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. Just so everybody knows, there's about 5 minutes left. We do have a few questions coming through, so we'll just start wrapping up what we've got here, and then if we get a chance to answer those questions, and for those that are wishing to stay on a bit longer, please do. So if we summarise just from a tips point of view, and it connects to one of the questions we just had a moment ago, wherever you possibly can start a transformation, start in the middle, start it with purpose. Actually building that purpose is key. And wherever you can actually do that as a co-creation within your business, absolutely paramount. So having that clarity of the purpose and defining in your purpose as well, the short-term and long-term activities that you're looking for, the objectives that you're looking to chase. So whenever we work with organizations, it's generally, well, it's pretty much always starting with purpose, the vision, values, and strategy. So from that, if we can just show the transformation accelerators, there's the purpose, there's leadership. So have incredibly clear sponsorship. Mentioned before about that level of accountability. And we'd always suggest particularly for large transformations that are happening, and there's a lot of large transformations happening, whether it's digital or cultural, is actually have a journey manager. somebody who can actually run the journey. And it's somebody who's sure understands the finances and the numbers, the importance of that they also have the empathy from a cultural point of view, because this is your opportunity from a cultural perspective as well. In the story is check for alignment, and check again for alignment. It's a two-way conversation always. And it's a great way to engage people throughout your organization, having absolute clarity of that story that's being told and connecting to it. In the capabilities, it's about co-creating these capabilities within your organization. You have amazing, most organizations have amazing talent. It's how to actually draw upon that talent now to identify what are those capabilities that'll help us get to the Thrive Zone. So listening and understanding and then driving towards that. And then the environment. Design all your services, designing the services around the customer, designing the services around the employees. Have those experiences mapped out so you're actually building those services for the future. And by having all of these, you'll actually decrease that uncertainty that's being faced. Yes. So just quickly, questions there.
Glenn, if I could just jump into something that I want to make sure the participants can make sure that the participants who are on can take advantage of this. We wanted to really offer the opportunity to share this journey. Glenn talked about the importance of having, starting the journey, and to start that with a journey manager. And if you wanted to talk to us about how you can start your transformation journey and how you can prepare for this new normal that we've stepped into, we want to offer a complimentary 1-hour coaching around this transformation journey for your company. So if you're interested in that, we've got about 5 spots that we'd love to take your name and email, and we'll contact you. We have the barcode on the screen, and you can just go ahead and sign up for that. And we'd love to have a chat with you and talk to you about where you are and where you want to be in this transformation journey.
Thanks, Audrey. Richard, can I just throw to you, we'll leave that up on the screen, please, but can I just throw to you, Richard, quickly, just the 2 questions. There's one from Dave in regards to wartime, but if you can also blend it into the next question as well in regards to... Yep, thank you.
Yeah, be very happy to, Glenn. So, David, the answer to your question, well, part of the answer to your question is assessing these ground conditions. What I know doesn't work is the ultimate leader of the organisation sending messages down, because what happens to the troops on the ground, that's coming from head office, and they don't hear those messages. They don't believe those messages because they don't know the person. So relationships are key here. What does work in terms of trying to find the ground conditions and opening up those lines of communication is hearing it from what's referred to as the manager once removed. So that layer just above their boss, that they have to be in constant contact so they can so that those streams of communication are happening, so you can be in contact with what's happening on the ground conditions. Otherwise, people come up and say, well, we're not being told stuff, you're not listening to us. So it's critically important to create an environment that's going to happen in. Unfortunately, if you're in an area which doesn't, if your organisation hasn't been built on a lot of trust, it's going to be very hard to do that now. Now, linking that into the frameworks to teach people how to think instead of what to think, that is once a great question. Thank you for posing it. The key thing is you have to redesign the processes that you're actually currently employing, where it's a lot of be referred to. The easiest thing for me to refer to here is the Socratic learning principles. So if you Googled Socratics, as in Socrates, learning principles, and it's around asking lots of questions. And that gets you to ponder your perspective, your context, and challenge your current paradigms, as opposed to be told what to think, learning by rote, learning by retention, learning by, that if you like, university or school style learning, which is the what to think, versus that exploratory discovery based learning, which is the how to think.
That's great. Thanks, Richard. I think they've had this one sign up left in regards to that. So, and if you need to reach out to us, please do to talk further about the transformation from an organisation point of view. I know we're just running just over time, so just move to the next slide, please. And what we're going to, we'll be covering off at the next webinar, building a strong safety culture. We have two absolute experts involved in this. When all these organisations, all of our companies that are now looking, how do we bounce back? How do we ensure that we actually are switched on from a safety point of view to bounce back? So absolute experts with Chris and with Charlie on the 12th of May. So very much looking forward to hosting that. So I just wanted to thank Richard. Oh, actually, one more question quickly. With the current work from home situation and financial crisis, can you identify what key must do for non-profit organisations? Audrey, would you like that?
Sure. Could you repeat that real quick?
With the current work from home situation and financial crisis, can you identify what key must-dos are there for non-profit organisations?
I think that I've seen a lot of partnerships, Glenn, between nonprofits and for-profit in the for-profit sector. I think that one thing that you have to do is to take inventory of and define your valid proposition, go back to that as we've talked about that, but also see what resources you have. So that could be the internal skills and talents and expertise you have in-house and how you're going to use that. But also really shore up the external patrons or the sponsors, the supporters that you have. I think for a lot of nonprofits, the issue right now is funding. That's certainly drying up, but I think you can really create some really strong partnerships. So go out and reach out to your network, meet those people that you've been meaning to meet. You may not be able to shake their hands, but meet them, partner up. There are actually, I think, a lot of organizations who are looking for that as well. Because to be honest, actually, I think that this is an opportunity for us to do business in a different way. That a new bottom line that people have been talking about, I think we're moving to that. I think people have to go to that piece of it. So if you have a nonprofit or you have a cause that you're working for, look for those partnerships. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. And Dennis, wherever you can capture the stories, capture their stories now. Because stories that are being generated over this particular period of time will only add value to what we all do in the future. So on that note, thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Richard, so much for sharing your insights into the transformation journeys. Really appreciated your time today, and so thank you very much.
It's great being here.
And,
thank you so much.
And for everybody, thank you, and for everybody that checked in, and I think we end up having 4 continents. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 12th of May. Okay, stay safe, everybody. Stay safe.
Take care.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks. Thanks, Richard.